It was a quiet night in the small, dusty town of Blackwater Crossing. The moon hung low over the horizon, casting an eerie silver glow across the barren landscape. A cool breeze swept through the tumbleweeds that rolled aimlessly along the dirt roads, and the faint sound of coyotes echoed from the distant hills. Most of the townsfolk had long since retired to their homes, seeking refuge from the chill that crept into the air as midnight approached. But not everyone in Blackwater Crossing slept easy on this particular night. On the outskirts of town, atop a lonely hill overlooking the sprawling ranchlands, a man sat vigilantly by a freshly dug grave. His name was John Callahan, though most who knew him simply called him Callahan. He was a wiry man with sun-baked skin and deep-set eyes that seemed to carry the weight of every sorrow he'd ever known. Tonight, those eyes were fixed intently on the mound of earth before him, his hand resting firmly on the stock of his rifle. The grave wasn't for a person. It was for his loyal companion, a dog named Rusty. Rusty had been more than just an animal to Callahan. He was a friend, a confidant, and perhaps even the only thing keeping him tethered to sanity during the loneliest days of his life. But now, Rusty was gone, buried beneath the cold, hard soil of that hill. And yet, something about it felt wrong. Callahan didn't believe in ghosts or spirits. Well, not until recently. You see, there was a peculiar phenomenon occurring at this very spot. Every night since Rusty's burial 3 nights ago, the grave would open again. The earth would shift, the wooden cross marking the site would topple, and when morning came, the hole would be empty once more. It happened without fail, leaving Callahan bewildered and increasingly uneasy. He couldn't explain it, nor could anyone else in the town. Some whispered of curses, others of tricksters playing cruel pranks. But Callahan refused to accept any explanation that didn't involve finding out what or who was responsible. So tonight, armed with nothing but his rifle and determination, he waited. He waited under the watchful eye of the stars, listening to the wind whisper secrets through the sagebrush. Little did they know, the mystery of the opening grave was tied to events far older than the founding of Blackwater Crossing itself. To understand how Callahan found himself in such a predicament, we must go back several weeks, to a time when life still held some semblance of normalcy. Callahan was a rancher, one among many in the arid expanse of the western frontier. His property stretched across miles of rolling plains dotted with cacti and mesquite trees. The land was harsh, unforgiving, and demanded constant attention if one hoped to survive. Yet despite its challenges, Callahan loved his ranch. It was where he felt most alive, most free. And Rusty, his faithful hound, was always by his side. Rusty was no ordinary dog. He was smart, intuitive, and possessed an uncanny ability to sense danger before it arrived. Many times, Rusty had saved Callahan from perilous situations, whether it was warning him of rattlesnakes coiled near the watering hole or alerting him to wandering bandits skulking around the perimeter of the ranch. Their bond was unshakable, forged through years of sheer hardship and triumph. But then came the storm, a storm unlike any other. It rolled in suddenly, dark clouds blotting out the sun and unleashing torrents of rain upon the parched earth. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the landscape in brief, blinding flashes. Amidst the chaos, Rusty disappeared. At first, Callahan thought his dog had merely sought shelter somewhere safe. But as hours turned into days and Rusty failed to return, worry began gnawing at Callahan's heart. Desperate, he scoured the surrounding area, calling out Rusty's name until his throat grew raw. He searched the barns, the corrals, the dense patches of scrubby woodland nearby. Nothing. Then on the 4th day, he stumbled upon a strange sight. Footprints in the mud. Not human footprints, but canine ones and unmistakably Rusty's. They led away from the ranch toward the eastern hills. Following the trail became an obsession for Callahan. Day after day, he rode his horse, tracking Rusty's prints across rugged terrain. The journey took him farther than he'd ever ventured before, deep into regions of the wilderness he'd only heard rumors about. Locals spoke of these places with hushed voices, warning travelers of hidden dangers lurking within. But Callahan paid them no mind. All that mattered was finding Rusty. Eventually, the trail ended, not because Rusty had stopped moving, but because the ground itself seemed to swallow the evidence. One moment, The paw prints were clear. The next, they vanished entirely, as though erased by an invisible hand. Confused and frustrated, Callahan dismounted his horse and looked around. That's when he saw it. A dilapidated cabin nestled amidst a grove of twisted pine trees. The cabin appeared abandoned, its walls weathered and cracked, its windows shattered. Weeds grew rampant around its foundation, and the door hung crookedly on rusted hinges. Despite its derelict state, something about it made Callahan uneasy. Still, driven by hope, he approached cautiously. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay, and shadows danced eerily in the dim light, filtering through gaps in the walls. As Callahan explored the interior, he noticed strange carvings etched into the wooden beams. Symbols he couldn't recognize, arranged in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. And then, in the corner of the room, he found a bundle wrapped in tattered cloth. Unwrapping, it revealed a collection of objects: a rusted pocket watch, a tarnished silver pendant shaped like a wolf's head, and a folded piece of parchment yellowed with age. The parchment bore writing in a language Callahan didn't understand, but one word stood out, repeated over and over: Erebus. He had no idea what it meant, but the discovery filled him with unease. Before he could ponder further, he heard a noise outside, the unmistakable bark of a dog. Rushing out, he saw Rusty standing at the edge of the clearing, wagging his tail as if nothing had happened. Relief washed over Callahan, quickly followed by anger. How dare Rusty leave him like that? Without another thought, he grabbed the dog and mounted his horse, determined to put as much distance between them and that creepy cabin as possible. What he didn't realize was that bringing Rusty back home also brought something else, something ancient, malevolent, and hungry. Back to the present. As Callahan sat atop the hill beside Rusty's grave, memories of that fateful discovery haunted him. He hadn't told anyone about the cabin or the strange items he'd found there. Why? Because he didn't want to seem crazy. Who would believe him anyway? But now, as the earth trembled slightly beneath him, he wondered if ignoring the truth had been a mistake. The shaking intensified, drawing Callahan's attention back to grave. Slowly, methodically, the soil began to shift. Clumps of dirt tumbled down into the hollow space below, creating a rhythmic thud that echoed unnaturally loud in the stillness of the night. Callahan tightened his grip on the rifle, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. And then it emerged. At first, all he could make out was a shadow, a dark shape riding against a backdrop of moonlit grass. But as it drew closer, Callahan gasped in horror. It wasn't Rusty, not exactly. Whatever it was, it bore his dog's form, but its movements were jerky, unnatural, as if controlled by unseen strings. Its fur was matted and streaked with mud, and its eyes, oh God, its eyes glowed a sickly green, burning with a hatred that chilled Callahan to the bone. Rusty, Callahan whispered, his voice trembling. The creature paused, tilting its head as if considering the question. Then, with a growl that sent shivers down Callahan's spine, it lunged. Instinct took over. Callahan raised his rifle and fired, the report echoing deafeningly across the hills. The bullet struck true, embedding itself in the creature's shoulder. For a moment, it staggered, letting out a high-pitched whine that sounded almost human. Then, impossibly, it kept coming, blood dripping from its wound, but showing no signs of slowing. Panic surged through Callahan as he scrambled backward, reloading his weapon with shaky hands. This wasn't right. None of it was right. What had he unleashed by retrieving Rusty from that cursed cabin? Just as the creature closed in, ready to pounce, a new voice cut through the tension. "Hold your fire, Callahan." Startled, Callahan looked up to see a figure emerging from the darkness. A tall, imposing man dressed in a long duster coat and wide-brimmed hat. In his hand, he carried a lantern whose flame flickered unnaturally bright. The newcomer stepped between Callahan and the monstrous dog, raising a palm toward the creature. "Begone!" the man commanded, his voice resonating with authority. To Callahan's astonishment, the creature froze mid-attack, its glowing eyes dimming slightly. With a final snarl, it collapsed onto the ground, reverting back into the lifeless body of Rusty. Callahan stared dumbfounded as the stranger turned to face him. "You're lucky I got here in time," the man said, lowering his lantern. That thing wasn't your dog anymore. It was a manifestation of something far worse. Worse. Callahan echoed, his mind racing. What do you mean? The man sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. Let me introduce myself. My name is Elias Grayson. Let's just say I deal with problems like this one. Now, tell me everything, starting with why you went poking around in a place you shouldn't have. Over the next few hours, Callahan recounted his story to Grayson, detailing the storm, the disappearance of Rusty, and the discovery of the cabin. Throughout the narration, Grayson listened intently, occasionally nodding or making notes on a small pad of paper. When Callahan finished, Grayson rubbed his temples, clearly troubled. I suspected as much, he murmured. That cabin you described, it's a gateway. An old one, predating the settlers. Erebus, the word you mentioned earlier, refers to a mythical underworld. Someone or something has been using that location to summon creatures from beyond our world. Callahan frowned. So Rusty, he wasn't really dead? Grayson shook his head gravely. No, not exactly. His spirit was trapped, manipulated into serving as a vessel for whatever crossed over. If I hadn't intervened tonight, things would have gotten much worse. But why him? Callahan asked, his voice tinged with sorrow. Why did it choose Rusty? That's the part that concerns me, Grayson replied. There are legends about dogs being able to perceive realms invisible to humans. Perhaps Rusty sensed the presence of the gateway and investigated out of instinct. Or maybe he trailed off, meeting Callahan's gaze. Maybe he was drawn there deliberately. Callahan felt a lump form in his throat. Deliberately? By whom? Grayson hesitated, choosing his words carefully. There are forces at work here that I don't fully understand yet. But one thing is certain, this isn't over. The gateway needs to be sealed permanently, and that won't be easy. Determined, Callahan nodded. Then we'll do it together. I owe Rusty that much. Grayson smiled grimly. All right, Callahan. Let's finish what we started. Their quest led them back to the cabin, now shrouded in an unnatural fog that clung to the ground like a living entity. Inside, the carvings on the beams pulsed faintly with a dull red light, and the air buzzed with energy that made both men's skin crawl. Using tools and knowledge gleaned from years of experience, Grayson worked tirelessly to weaken the gateway's power. Meanwhile, Callahan kept watch, ensuring no unwanted visitors interrupted their efforts. Tensions ran high, especially when the ground began to quake violently, signaling the arrival of another intruder. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in black, its face obscured by a hood. It moved silently, almost ghost-like, and carried a staff adorned with strange runes. Without hesitation, Grayson confronted the intruder, engaging in a battle of wills that involved incantations and gestures neither Callahan nor Rusty could comprehend. In the end, it was Callahan who delivered the decisive blow, shooting the staff out of the intruder's grasp. Deprived of his weapon, the figure dissolved into smoke, vanishing into thin air. With the immediate threat neutralized, Grayson completed the ritual, collapsing the gateway and sealing the cabin forever. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the two men stood exhausted but triumphant. You did good, Callahan, Grayson said, extending a hand. Not many would have faced this kind of danger so bravely. Callahan accepted the handshake, his thoughts drifting to Rusty. Though the ordeal had ended, the pain of losing his beloved companion remained fresh. Still, he found solace in knowing that Rusty's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. As they rode away from the cabin, leaving its ruins behind, Callahan glanced at the rising sun. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills and valleys, lay new adventures waiting to unfold. And though he mourned the loss of his friend, he vowed never to lose sight of the lessons learned this night. For in the Wild West, survival wasn't just about strength or skill. It was about courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds formed between man and beast. The journey back to Blackwater Crossing was somber, the weight of recent events pressing heavily on Callahan's shoulders. The sun climbed higher into the sky, its rays casting long shadows across the arid landscape. Dust kicked up beneath the hooves of his horse, swirling around him like a reminder of the fleeting nature of life. Grayson rode alongside, silent for the most part, lost in his own thoughts. As they neared the outskirts of town, Callahan broke the silence. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice low and tinged with uncertainty. Grayson glanced at him, his sharp eyes reflecting a mix of sympathy and resolve. "Now," he began, "you rebuild. You honor Rusty's memory by living your life fully, knowing that what you faced and conquered was far greater than most men ever will." Callahan nodded slowly, though the words offered little comfort. Rebuilding felt like an insurmountable task, especially when the emptiness left behind by Rusty seemed so vast. But there was no denying the truth in Grayson's advice. Life moved forward, whether one wanted it to or not. Upon their arrival in Blackwater Crossing, the townsfolk greeted them with curious stares and murmured whispers. Word traveled fast in such a small community, and news of Callahan's ordeal had likely spread through gossip and speculation. Some approached cautiously, asking questions about Rusty and the strange happenings at the hill. Others kept their distance, wary of whatever unseen forces might still linger in the air. Among those who sought answers was Sarah Bennett, the local blacksmith's daughter. She stood near the general store, her hands clasped tightly together as if bracing herself for bad news. When she spotted Callahan dismounting his horse, she rushed over, her face pale but determined. "John," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "is it true? About Rusty in the grave?" Callahan hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He respected Sarah's concern. She'd always been kind to both him and Rusty, often bringing scraps from her family's meals whenever she visited the ranch. Finally, he sighed and nodded. "It's true, Sarah. Rusty's gone. But there's more to the story than anyone knows." Her expression softened, empathy replacing shock. "If there's anything I can do—" She trailed off, leaving the offer open-ended. Callahan managed a weak smile. "Just keep an eye on things here while I figure out what comes next. For now, that's all anyone can do." Sarah nodded solemnly before stepping aside to let Grayson pass. The stranger garnered even more attention than Callahan, his mysterious demeanor and unusual attire drawing stares from every direction. Few dared speak directly to him, though several ventured close enough to whisper among themselves. Grayson appeared unfazed by the scrutiny, maintaining a calm exterior as he surveyed the town. Eventually, he turned to Callahan. "I should be going," he announced abruptly. "There are other places that need my attention, other gates that require sealing. But remember this. If anything else unusual occurs, if you sense danger approaching, don't hesitate to find me." "Find you?" Callahan echoed, frowning. "How am I supposed to do that?" Grayson smirked faintly, pulling a small, intricately carved whistle from his coat pocket. "Blow this," he instructed, handing it over. "It'll summon me wherever I may be. Just don't use it lightly. Such tools come with consequences." With that cryptic warning, Grayson tipped his hat and walked away, disappearing into the crowd without another word. Callahan stared after him, clutching the whistle in his hand. Its surface felt cold to the touch, almost unnatural, as though imbued with some hidden power. Days passed, blending into weeks as Callahan settled back into the routines of ranch life. Though the initial shock of Rusty's death began to fade, the ache remained, a constant companion that reminded him of everything he'd lost. Yet amidst the sorrow, something unexpected began to stir, a sense of purpose. Inspired by Grayson's teachings and the knowledge gained during their shared adventure, Callahan started investigating the history of Blackwater Crossing and its surrounding lands. He spent countless hours poring over dusty old books in the town library, speaking with elders who remembered tales passed down through generations. What he uncovered painted a picture far darker and more complex than he'd ever imagined. Long ago, before settlers arrived, the region had been sacred ground for indigenous tribes. They believed it served as a nexus point between worlds, a place where boundaries blurred and spirits roamed freely. Over time, however, these beliefs faded into legend, dismissed as superstition by newcomers eager to claim the land for themselves. Now, thanks to Grayson's intervention, Callahan understood the truth behind those stories. One evening, as twilight bathed the ranch in hues of gold and purple, Callahan sat on his porch, gazing out at the horizon. In his lap, rested the whistle Grayson had given him, its presence both comforting and unsettling. He wondered if others like him existed. People who fought against forces beyond comprehension, protecting innocent lives without recognition or reward. His musings were interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching from a road. Rising to his feet, Callahan squinted into the fading light, trying to make out the rider's form. As the figure drew closer, he recognized Sarah Bennett, her normally cheerful demeanor replaced by urgency. "John," she called out, reining her horse to a halt. "You have to come quick. Something's happening at the old mine shaft outside of town." Callahan's heart skipped a beat. The mine shaft, an abandoned site rumored to hold untold secrets, had always been shrouded in mystery. If Grayson's warnings held any merit, then whatever awaited them there could prove catastrophic. Without hesitation, Callahan grabbed his rifle and mounted his horse. Together, he and Sarah raced toward the mine shaft, the wind whipping past as they galloped through the night. Stars began to twinkle overhead, their light guiding them along the rocky trail, leading to the entrance. When they arrived, they found the area eerily quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. The mine shaft itself loomed ahead, its dark mouth yawning like a beast preparing to swallow them whole. Cautiously, Callahan dismounted, motioning for Sarah to stay behind. "I don't know what we're dealing with," he whispered, checking the chamber of his rifle. "But whatever it is, it won't end well unless we handle it carefully." Sarah nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. "Let me help," she insisted. "I won't slow you down, I promise." Reluctantly, Callahan agreed, trusting her judgment despite the dangers ahead. Together, they ventured into the mine shaft, lanterns in hand, their footsteps echoing ominously against the stone walls. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, until frost clung visibly to the surfaces around them. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet, forcing them to stumble. From the darkness emerged shapes, shadowy figures that seemed to shift and writhe unnaturally. Their forms resembled neither man nor beast, yet carried an undeniable malevolence. Callahan raised his rifle, aiming steadily despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Beside him, Sarah brandished a makeshift torch, its flame illuminating their adversaries briefly before being extinguished by a gust of wind. "This isn't good," Callahan muttered under his breath, backing away slowly. "We need reinforcements." Before he could act further, a familiar voice echoed through the cavern. "Hold your fire, Callahan." Out of the gloom stepped none other than Elias Grayson, his lantern blazing brighter than ever before. Behind him followed a group of strangers, each wielding peculiar weapons and artifacts. Among them was a woman clad in leather armor, her piercing gaze locking onto Callahan instantly. "Who are you people?" Callahan demanded, lowering his rifle slightly. Grayson smiled grimly. "These are allies, Callahan. Members of a network dedicated to combating threats like the ones you see before us. And trust me, you're going to need all the help you can get tonight." The battle that ensued tested every ounce of courage and resourcefulness Callahan possessed. Shadows clashed with light, ancient powers colliding in a symphony of chaos. At one point, Callahan found himself cornered, surrounded by creatures whose origins defied logic. Desperation drove him to blow the whistle Grayson had given him, unleashing a sonic wave that momentarily stunned his attackers. When the dust settled, the threat had been neutralized, at least temporarily. Exhausted but alive, Callahan leaned against a nearby rock, surveying the aftermath. Bodies, or rather, remnants of whatever those things truly were, lay scattered across the floor, dissolving into nothingness as sunlight filtered into the cavern. Grayson approached him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did well, Callahan," he praised. "Truly remarkable. But why me?" Callahan asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "Why does this keep happening to me?" Grayson's expression turned serious. "Because, my friend, you possess qualities rare in this world: courage, resilience, and a willingness to confront the unknown. Those traits make you invaluable in our fight. And believe me, the fight is far from over." Callahan looked around at the assembled group, realizing for the first time that he wasn't alone. Others shared his burden, carrying the weight of protecting humanity from forces that lurked just beyond sight. Perhaps, he thought, that realization brought with it a glimmer of hope. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in vibrant shades of orange and pink, Callahan knew his life would never return to normal. But perhaps, in embracing the challenges ahead, he might discover a new kind of peace, one forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the bonds of friendship. For in the Wild West, legends weren't born, they were made. And John Callahan, once a simple rancher mourning the loss of his dog, had taken the first steps toward becoming something greater. The days following the battle at the mine shaft brought a strange sense of normalcy to Blackwater Crossing, a deceptive calm that masked the brewing storm beneath the surface. Callahan returned to his ranch, resuming the daily chores and routines that defined his life. Yet, every now and then, he would pause mid-task, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something, or someone, to appear. Sarah Bennett became a frequent visitor, often bringing supplies or simply stopping by to check on him. Their conversations grew deeper, touching not only on the events they'd witnessed together, but also on the broader implications of what they had uncovered. She spoke of her father's tales from the blacksmith trade, stories of weapons forged with mysterious properties and ancient symbols etched into steel. Callahan listened intently, realizing that the world was far more complex than he had ever imagined. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, Sarah arrived with an unusual request. "John," she began hesitantly, her hands twisting nervously in her apron, "there's something I think you should see." Callahan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What is it?" She motioned for him to follow her, leading him to the edge of town where the old church stood abandoned. Its wooden structure had long since succumbed to decay, its roof collapsing in places and vines creeping up its walls. Despite its dilapidated state, there was an undeniable aura about the place, one that made even the boldest townsfolk avoid it after dark. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and earth, and the faint creak of floorboards echoed their steps. At the back of the church, Sarah stopped before a large, ornate chest covered in dust. "This has been here for as long as anyone can remember," she explained, running her fingers lightly over the carvings adorning its surface. "No one knows who put here or why." Callahan examined the chest closely, noting the intricate designs carved into its lid. They resembled the symbols he had seen in the cabin near the gateway, symbols tied to the Erebus legends Grayson had mentioned. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the significance of this discovery. "Open it," he said, his voice steady despite the unease gnawing at him. Sarah hesitated but complied, prying open the heavy lid with surprising ease. Inside lay a collection of artifacts, a jagged blade with a hilt wrapped in leather, a small hourglass filled with glowing sand, and a leather-bound journal whose pages fluttered softly as if stirred by an invisible breeze. Callahan picked up the journal first, flipping through its yellowed pages. Each entry was written in a language unfamiliar to him, but certain words stood out, words like Erebus, Nexus, and Seal. The further he read, the more his heart raced. These writings detailed rituals and incantations meant to strengthen or weaken gateways between worlds. "This explains so much," he murmured, looking up at Sarah. "It confirms what Grayson told us. There are others like me, others who fought these battles, and they left behind tools to help those who come after them." Sarah nodded, though her expression betrayed her apprehension. But why leave such dangerous things lie around? Why not destroy them? Callahan shook his head. Because destruction isn't always the answer. Sometimes you need to understand the enemy to defeat it. He closed the journal gently, placing it back in the chest. "We shouldn't touch anything else until we know exactly what we're dealing with." That night, Callahan couldn't sleep. Restless thoughts swirled in his mind, each one pulling him further into the labyrinth of mysteries surrounding the Wild West. Who were the people who created these artifacts? What drove them to fight against forces beyond comprehension? And most importantly, why did it feel like their legacy had fallen to him? Unable to shake the questions, he decided to visit the library once more, hoping to uncover more clues about the history of Blackwater Crossing and its ties to the supernatural. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harper, greeted him warmly. "Ah, Mr. Callahan," she said, adjusting her spectacles. "You seem to have developed quite the interest in our local lore lately." Is everything all right? Callahan smiled politely. Just trying to piece together some things, ma'am. Do you happen to have any records about the old church? Or perhaps anything about strange occurrences in the area? Mrs. Harper tapped her chin thoughtfully. Well, there is one book that might interest you. It's tucked away in the archives. It doesn't get many visitors, so I almost forgot about it. She disappeared briefly, returning moments later with a thick tome bound in cracked leather. The cover bore no title. Only a single symbol etched into its surface, a symbol identical to those on the chest in the church. Callahan's breath hitched as he took the book from her hands. Be careful with that, Mrs. Harper warned, her tone suddenly serious. Some say it holds knowledge best left undisturbed. Callahan assured her he would be cautious, retreating to a quiet corner of the library to delve into its contents. The text inside was dense, filled with diagrams and descriptions of phenomena that defied explanation. One passage, however, caught his attention immediately. Asterisk, in times of great upheaval, when the veil between worlds grows thin, a chosen few shall rise to bear the burden of balance. Through trials and tribulations, they shall wield the power to seal the breaches, ensuring the survival of both realms. Asterisk, a shiver ran down Callahan's spine as he reread the passage. Could it be referring to him? To Grayson and his allies? Or was it merely coincidence? Days turned into weeks, and Callahan found himself drawn deeper into the world of the supernatural. With Grayson's guidance and the resources at his disposal, he began training not just physically, but mentally as well. Grayson introduced him to techniques for sensing anomalies in the environment, teaching him how to recognize signs of impending danger. You must learn to trust your instincts, Grayson advised during one session. The supernatural often manifests itself in ways that defy logic. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Callahan practiced tirelessly, pushing his limits until exhaustion claimed him. Alongside his newfound skills, he carried the weight of responsibility. Every step forward reminded him of Rusty, whose sacrifice had set him on this path. Though the pain of losing his companion still lingered, it no longer consumed him. Instead, it fueled his determination to honor Rusty's memory by protecting others from similar fates. One crisp autumn morning, a telegram arrived at the general store addressed to Callahan. The sender was unknown, but the message was clear. Asterisk, the Nexus stirs again. Come quickly. Asterisk. Callahan recognized the term instantly. It referred to the same kind of gateway Grayson had sealed months ago. Without hesitation, he saddled his horse and rode toward the coordinates provided in the telegram. Along the way, he encountered Sarah, who insisted on accompanying him. Together, they reached a remote valley surrounded by jagged cliffs. At its center stood a massive stone archway, its surface pulsating with an otherworldly light. Shadows writhed within its confines, their forms shifting constantly as if alive. Before they could act, a figure stepped forward from the shadows. A man dressed in tattered robes, his face obscured by a hood. You cannot stop this, he declared, his voice echoing unnaturally. The Nexus belongs to no one. It exists to restore balance, whether you understand it or not. Callahan tightened his grip on his rifle, standing firm despite the fear clawing at his insides. Balance doesn't mean destruction, he countered. And if that's what you're offering, then count me out. The robed figure laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Foolish mortal, you know nothing the forces at play here. As the confrontation escalated, Callahan noticed movement in the periphery, Grayson and his team emerging from the tree line, ready to assist. With renewed confidence, Callahan charged forward, determined to prevent another catastrophe. The battle that followed tested every ounce of strength and skill Callahan had acquired. Shadows clashed with light, ancient powers colliding in a symphony of chaos. In the end, it was Callahan who delivered the decisive blow, using the blade from the church chest to shatter the Nexus, sealing it forever. When the dust settled, Grayson approached him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. Well done, Callahan, he praised. You've proven yourself worthy of this mantle. Callahan looked around at the assembled group, the allies he had gained through shared struggles, and felt a swell of pride. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone. Together, they would face whatever came next, united by a common purpose. For in the Wild West, legends weren't born. They were forged in fire and tempered by courage. And John Callahan, once a simple rancher mourning the loss of his dog, had become something greater, a guardian of the unseen, protector of the innocent, and keeper of the balance between worlds.